Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our session. We're going to be talking about the role of the PMO director and specifically how to get started as a PMO director. Now, just first things first, this session is really on the back of our playbook that we created on how to get started as a PMO director. Jen has put in chat there. If anybody hasn't downloaded that yet, that's a free download from us. Free as always. What we'll just take is your email address and some contact details so we know who's kind of downloaded that, but you'll be able to download that and read that in full after the session today. So here we go with kind of where we're going to go. So in the next kind of 45-50 minutes, what I'm going to cover is kind of four different areas. The first one is I'm just going to talk about what the difference is between a PMO manager versus a PMO director. And I know there's been lots of conversations and whether the PMO director role actually exists. And even though you might not be called a PMO director or the role might not appear as a PMO director in your organization, we'll talk about the role and hopefully you'll recognize that as a potential role in your organization or one that is already there, but might actually be called something different. I'm then going to go and talk about what the life of a PMO director looks like. So we'll kind of walk through a day of a PMO director and see the types of things that they do. Again, they may be activities that are currently taking place in your organization, but actually you might say at the minute, there's nobody who actually kind of does that in our organization. And we can then have a conversation in terms of how we move into that role. We're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to be a competent or an effective PMO director. And I'm going to just touch on a couple of knowledge, skills and behaviours that we think are relevant for that role. And then we're going to just talk for a little bit in terms of kind of how to move into the PMO director role if that's somewhere you aspire to move into. So let's kind of kick off with this kind of PMO manager role versus PMO director. Can I just, we're going to see if you can all use your Zoom accounts now. Anybody want to kind of, can you put your hands up or kind of just mention in chat if you are currently, your job title or you fulfill the role of a PMO manager? Just curious as to how many we've got on there. Yeah, so we've got a couple of PMO managers. Okay. Is there anybody on who currently has the role of PMO director? Oh, so aspirational then in terms of kind of wanting to be the PMO director. So in terms of the kind of the definitions that I'm going to talk about now in terms of the PMO manager versus the PMO director, these are based on the House of PMO's PMO competency framework and the role descriptions that sit within those. And the PMO competency framework is a publication that was produced, I think, 4 years ago now, that kind of clearly defines 4 roles within the PMO. So they tend to be kind of levels as opposed to defined job titles that you get, which is the PMO administrator, PMO analyst, PMO manager, and PMO director. So let's just have a look at kind of what that PMO manager versus PMO director does, and we can kind of go into a little bit more detail. So a PMO manager typically, unsurprisingly, will manage a PMO. Now that can be a project-based PMO, so you're actually supporting the delivery of a project, potentially either reporting into the project manager. It could be a program level PMO where you're reporting into the program manager, or it could even be a portfolio level PMO where rather than kind of looking after individual projects and programs, what you're looking after is the portfolio of the organization and potentially interacting with multiple project and program managers, and may also be interacting with the resource managers, the senior managers in the organization who are interested in the progress and projects across the whole organization. And typically, the PMO manager looks at who they have in their team from the PMO perspective, looks at what they can do to support project program managers, senior managers in the delivery of that portfolio, and start thinking, well, actually, how do I want to set the PMO up? What does that look like? How do we manage that PMO on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-by-month basis? What are the kind of things that we do? What kind of services do we want to offer from that PMO? And as over time, what typically happens is, particularly if you're at a program level PMO or an enterprise PMO, the needs of the organization will change, and part of the role of the PMO manager is to kind of change how that PMO supports their customers as they kind of go through its lifetime. And there will be occasions where actually part of that role is to actually shut down a PMO. Now, there are lots of text that says, kind of people shut down PMOs and that's a bad thing. Well, we would argue certainly from a project level PMO and a program level PMO, actually they should be shut down at the end of the project or program. Now, the PMO team who works in that might move on to another project or program, so they still exist as a team, but the PMO for that particular project and program should shut down as a closure. Even at a portfolio level, if you're an enterprise PMO, there may be a organization restructure, and I've been in a couple of organizations where I was a PMO manager, where the organization structure changed and we had to change the number of PMOs that were in the organization, and therefore one particular PMO would shut down and it would actually kind of spring up two other PMOs or vice versa. So again, you would expect a PMO to kind of transform or close down along with those as the corporation needs them or the organization needs to do them. And essentially what we're trying to do at each of those kind of PMO levels is try to ensure that we're making delivery as easy as possible. So nobody's going to say that project delivery is easy or program delivery is easy, because it absolutely isn't. And I always revert back to a saying from a good friend of ours who says PMOs are there to ensure organizations can deliver projects with less energy and less adrenaline. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible and trying to support people. And again, quite a mindset change from there to being kind of the policeman who's trying to kind of make sure we're just doing everything correctly, but actually really supporting them and working with project and program managers in terms of how can we actually help you deliver projects better. And typically the PMO manager is focused on, as I say, helping that kind of project or program manager. Now, where the PMO director comes in is really where we take one step up in the organization. And this is where, rather than kind of look at kind of just a PMO, the PMO director is a role where we look across the whole organization and say, what does a PMO division or a department look like in this organization? What can a PMO do in the various parts of the organization to help us get the biggest bang for our buck and make sure that we can actually do the best we can in delivering against the strategy that leads to where the organization wants to go? And so rather than just focusing on kind of one individual PMO, the PMO director is looking at the strategy of the organization, potentially helping the organization look at the structure of what the portfolio should be. So what actually should be delivered as a program, what should be delivered as standalone projects, and actually, should we have a PMO over here that looks after, is committed to one particular kind of big strategic program? Do we have a project office over here that should look after those three different projects because they're all related? Do we set up a kind of an overall enterprise PMO? Does it need 3 or 4 enterprise PMOs? And how does that all come together to ensure that we're not just supporting the projects and programs, but we're actually supporting the senior executive of the organization to deliver the strategy for the organization? Now, it's really interesting in terms of kind of what that role is called, because some PMO directors actually just look after PMO individuals. So we're currently working with a client at the moment who they're doing a restructure of their PMO. There's a PMO director, and what they're doing is they've pulled all of the resources who are in PMOs across the whole organization and saying, we've got a whole mix of skills and capabilities and experience across the organization. How best can we use all of those people in different PMOs across the organization to support that delivery? In other organizations, the PMO director is sometimes called the head of delivery, where actually they have a dual role. They actually own all of the project managers and program managers, allocate them out to the various projects and programs, as well as having the community of PMO resources, again, to do that same thing and understanding, well, where do PMOs sit across the organization? Which skills need to be there in the various kind of PMOs, which ones are going to be focused on finance, which ones are perhaps going to kind of focus on reporting and make those kind of decisions. So that move from a PMO manager to a PMO director is quite a step change, both in terms of the stakeholders who you'll be dealing with, but also in terms of what your metrics and measures will be in terms of what success looks like for your PMO. The skills and capabilities of a PMO manager can be sometimes quite different from what you need as a PMO director. If you're a PMO manager working for a project manager, then actually they're going to be looking to you and supporting in terms of kind of the delivery, kind of typically the delivery processes. They may be looking to you to actually kind of maintain some of the things like the risk register, the plans, and that kind of day-to-day running of the project. When we work up to a PMO director role, we're really going to be working with the senior executives of the organization, and they are going to be looking to the PMO director to say, well, we've got business as usual, which we manage through our typical organization structure, but actually we've got a whole raft of investment now in various projects across the organization. How can you help us set up the various structures that need to be in place? So again, typically the PMO manager will be using things like the resource management processes, which are already established, to kind of make sure they've got the resources for their particular project or program that they're supporting. They will use the financial kind of processes that have been set up with finance. So we've got all of the project finance processes set up. Whereas the PMO director will typically establish those across the whole organization. So they will be working with the teams in HR, they'll be working with the teams with procurement, they'll be looking at that kind of center of excellence type activity in terms of how do we want to deliver projects in this organization. So again, the PMO director might initiate things like, well, how are we going to embed AI in the project management processes? Are we going to be using kind of standard waterfall processes? Which version of the kind of the various kind of delivery frameworks are we going to use? How do we provide a level of independent assurance across those projects and programs so we can actually go and report up at the senior level, not just saying how are these individual projects and programs being delivered, but looking at that kind of holistic view that says, actually, this is how we're delivering against our strategy. So very much kind of that kind of top up. And we've seen in a lot of organizations, there's lots of PMOs across the organization doing lots of really good work, but there's little connectivity between those various PMOs because sometimes they have different delivery frameworks for good reason. So, the IT department might be very much looking at kind of agile delivery, whereas in the kind of the construction, they may be working to some kind of construction delivery framework. What we often see as well is where we've got kind of multiple PMOs across the organization. We often find, which is always kind of really painful for the people who are trying to collate all of the information, is we've actually got different systems that have been bought and supported by different PMOs across the organization. So typically a PMO director role will appear when the organization recognizes the PMO as a business function, not just as an add-on to projects and programs or a reporting function that kind of collects all of that information from projects and programs at an enterprise level. So there is definitely some work to be done from an organization perspective to really kind of recognize what the PMO can add to the organization and how it can help drive better project and program delivery across the piece. Again, not just looking at those individual projects and programs. What we can also find is in organizations, people can undertake some of those PMO director roles where we've got disparate portfolios across the organization. So for example, what you may have is an organization that is a global organization, kind of globally across the globe, funnily enough. But essentially what they might have then is a PMO three PMO directors across the organization, because the organizations are set or managed as completely separate business units. In a perfect world, and as I often say, when we're in textbook land, what we're looking for is having that kind of one director level role that actually kind of pulls all of that together, because as an organization has an overall strategy for delivering, that's where that kind of PMO director will be aligned to. And what becomes a really interesting question is who that PMO director reports into. And so again, we see lots of kind of different models across the reality of what's out there in the real world. So sometimes they'll report into finance, which often drives a very kind of financial view of delivery, unsurprisingly. Sometimes that reports into IT. And I always find that kind of a really interesting place to sit, because for some reason, organizations don't like the concept of IT being the driver of the organization, even though it is obviously kind of a key driver for the success of the organization. But typically what we'd want the PMO director to report into is something like kind of the chief executive's office. It may not necessarily be the chief executive themselves, but it may be into kind of head of shared services, where we're saying actually these are all of the kind of supporting functions that allows our organization to work effectively and efficiently to drive where we want the organization to get to. We had nobody kind of put their hand up and say they were a PMO director when we asked that first question. Does anybody recognize that as a role within their organization that is currently in existence? So we've got Kasim has said that's something that is potentially in their organization. Yes. So really interesting in terms of kind of how what we've found over the last 5 years, this role of the PMO director is becoming more common, more established, and people are starting to get an idea that actually if we really want to make the most of what we deliver in terms of what we invest in projects and programs, having a PMO director to support that is really adds value. And if you ever do something like a P3M3 assessment, where you're doing an assessment of the maturity of your organization to get to level 3, which is the kind of consistent, successful delivery of projects and programs, it does say it needs an enterprise PMO. And the expectation is that the head of that enterprise PMO is not just doing the role of a PMO manager, but is actually doing the role of the PMO director. So you really need to have that kind of oversight of what's going to be happening across the organization. What is really interesting is that we find that not all PMO managers are capable of stepping up to PMO director. What we're finding is you may have other people across the organization who have led or sponsored a key transformational program they've been the sponsor of a key transformational program. They understand the business, they understand how the organization works, they understand their marketplace, and have enough of a high level understanding, and importantly have the trust and have credibility at a senior level to be able to talk about how projects and programs can be used to deliver the strategy for the organization. What is really interesting is that PMO director may not be kind of qualified in Prince 2 or SAFE or DevOps, and they will have people who are working within their Centre of Excellence who will be delivering the delivery of, they will be creating and maintaining the delivery framework to support that. But the conversations that are had at kind of strategic level, there are people coming into the PMO from other parts of the business unit, as I said, who've done that sponsoring role. So it's a really interesting position in terms of kind of being able to move up from a kind of a PMO perspective, or coming in from a projects perspective, or coming in from an operational kind of business unit perspective. Interestingly, Phil, you've asked the question in terms of, kind of do PMO directors have delivery and PMO PMO responsibility as well, and I would say there's a fair mixture of both out there. The interesting bit is if you've got a head of delivery who've got the project and program managers, and they've got the PMO people, we just need to be very careful about the level of objectivity around reporting and assurance. I think the other thing, for that to work particularly effectively, what you need is recognition that accountability for delivering the projects and programs sits with not just the project managers, but also the project and program sponsors, which is still an area where organizations don't necessarily hold senior managers accountable for successful delivery of the benefits and therefore the contribution to strategy for their organizations. So again, a lot of, even at an enterprise level, a lot of the PMO managers, a lot of the reporting is basically saying, well, these projects are delivering on time, to cost, to schedule, or not, as the case may be, and kind of looking at some of those kind of escalations, where actually a true enterprise PMO will be looking, they'll keep reporting after projects have gone live and be looking at the realization of benefits, looking at how that amalgamated with the information that's coming from operational reports, because it's only the delivery of benefits and those additional kind of what we're doing from an operations perspective can we actually look at kind of, well, are we achieving our strategy? So kind of that, when you've got a kind of a PMO director who's recognized as a contributor, running a division or a function that contributes to the strategy of the organization, there's a much greater interaction between the operational reporting day to day of what's happening in the business with where are the benefits coming from the projects, and that feeding back into what projects are currently running, when they're running, what new projects need to be in the pipeline. So that's where we are in terms of that's kind of, and I'm looking at the time, I've spent 25 minutes talking about that. So let me just kind of quickly run through a kind of a PMO director's day. So we're saying they don't start till 9 o'clock, which, that's interesting in terms of kind of from a starting time. So the first thing kind of the PMO director will do during the day, essentially, or this particular PMO director is going to be doing through the day, is actually just kind of having a look at a dashboard about where in the world are we in terms of the current projects and programs, what immediately needs to be dealt with. Now, again, from a PMO manager perspective, a PMO director perspective, we're not accountable for the successful delivery of projects and programs. However, what we are accountable for is making sure that where red flags are across the delivery of the portfolio, including the delivery of benefits, is that they've been addressed effectively by those who are accountable at whatever level. So that might be, there's red flags that need to be dealt with by project and program managers. There may be red flags that need to be dealt with by sponsors, but there may also be red flags that actually even the kind of the sponsor is outside of the remit of authority and actually needs to be escalated up to a even more senior level, up to kind of a portfolio board, or even to the kind of the main board itself. So what they're kind of checking at is that all of the processes are working and things are being dealt with. And this is always a really interesting kind of mindset from a PMO perspective. An awful lot of people who work in the PMO are very keen to kind of jump in with both feet and say, hold on, kind of, I'm going to make a decision on this, or I'm going to make this happen. And what we're doing is we're overseeing that to make sure that the processes are happening and raising the red flags where they need to be raised, rather than actually kind of without the right authority kind of dipping in and starting making decisions and overstepping the mark and kind of trying to override decisions that project managers and sponsors are making on that project. And I think this is a really interesting place where the PMO director needs to be really careful that they're making decisions that are within the remit of the project program manager's role or the sponsor's role. So that's where the kind of where we kind of potentially start the day. Then I'm off to kind of the next session is really start looking again with the organization, say, what's our roadmap? Where is the organization going over the next kind of 6 to 12 months? What do we need in terms of benefits from projects that are just delivering or kind of delivered 3-6 months ago, all the benefits coming in? What does that mean for the pipeline of projects that are coming on board? Because if you've got a project, here we go, this is the perfect world where projects have delivered early, the benefits are far greater than we'd anticipated. What we might want to do is actually look and say, well, actually, there's a number of projects we don't need anymore because we're already hitting the targets we need. Or actually, there's something that's happening in business as usual. That means actually we need to bring on another couple of projects because we need to kind of counteract some of that downside. Off to 11 o'clock. The PMO director will have a team. Now, again, interesting in terms of if they're head of the enterprise PMO, but they may also have responsibility for PMO managers who sit across the organization. And this is really about kind of looking at what perhaps additional support might some projects and programs require. And again, this is the beauty of having this role of the PMO director that says, actually, I can take somebody who's providing support on one project and pull them over to do some support on another project because there's a particular challenge that needs to be addressed. Or again, actually, perhaps we might need to bring in a consultant or a contractor because there's a particularly knotty problem that we don't have the skills across the organization in PMO that we can address. So again, we maintain that support and oversight of all of the projects and support the PMO managers across the organization to make sure that they're delivering as they're required by their projects and programs. So off to lunch, and of course we're going to have a working lunch, and again we mentioned earlier that the stakeholders of a PMO director are potentially a different set of stakeholders to what you might have worked with as a PMO manager. So again, some really interesting conversations with perhaps the HR function. So looking at introducing a new tool, perhaps we want to have some linkages through to our SAP or Oracle system. So we have all of the names of new starters and kind of how do we understand kind of what rates they're at. And again, that will be dealt with. So from working with the HR department, it may be actually we need to start thinking about what are the career paths for PMO and project people to move in and out of the delivery teams. And again, who's going to look after the competency framework, the skills matrix? Is that, kind of where's that relationship with HR? One of the roles that has always been interesting, I think, with finance and excuse me, again, very typical at a PMO director role. Well, how does our relationship with finance work? So kind of how do those kind of the business as usual allocation of budgets to projects work? Kind of all of sometimes the kind of the mundane kind of who kind of signs off timesheets, which is always an interesting one. So again, might be talking with some kind of key resource managers in terms of some of the challenges of we all know those vagaries of projects where kind of things don't start on the right day, and therefore we need to kind of play around with resources. So keeping a good relationship with resource managers may also be something that the PMO director the PMO director gets involved with. So after lunch, straight into some preparation for going into a kind of steering committee for kind of 3 o'clock. So again, from a steering committee perspective, I don't necessarily expect the PMO director to be at an individual project steering committee, but if along the kind of the management of portfolio structure, that kind of investment committee might be where the PMO director will chair and be part of, by talking about kind of where is the investment, what investments are coming up, how are we looking in terms of managing the kind of the annual investment in projects and programs, what's the latest combination of projects that we're going to be looking at. So again, that might kind of take up the afternoon of a PMO director. And then kind of finally, kind of towards the end of the day, because we've not quite had enough yet. So kind of for the last hour, what the PMO director is going to be doing is potentially looking at the amalgamated portfolio status report. So again, looking at kind of how we take information from the individual project and program reports and pull them together so it's meaningful information, not for the projects and program managers, but for the senior executives who are looking at kind of what's going to be the impact over the next kind of 3 to 6 months. What is it we want to do? And typically and this is where the credibility of the PMO director really kind of comes into its own, because they have to be able to kind of stand up to the chief exec and the board and say, well, actually, if we carry on this kind of current trajectory, if this program doesn't get the right level of sponsorship, if the funding's not made available at the right time for this particular program, actually these are the kind of the overall impact on the strategy. And again, from a PMO manager's perspective, it isn't a case of taking over the role of the project or program manager or even the kind of program sponsor. What they're doing is looking at that kind of holistic view of everything together and how that's impacting on strategy. And so again, if you know the management of portfolio methodology and framework, they're essentially playing the role of the portfolio manager on behalf of the organization. And again, very often the PMO director doesn't have decision-making authority in terms of on what projects and programs are actually going to be undertaken. That accountability sits with the investment board or the main board. But what the PMO director needs to be able to do is to be able to challenge confidently and be able to say, well, yes, I know you want to do projects A, B, and C, but do you recognize that if you choose projects A, B, and C, you're actually going to kind of miss this particular target we've got set? Actually, if you do projects A, B, and D, actually that gives us a much better return on the overall investment. And in order to do that, you can't just look at what's happened with those individual projects and programs. You actually have to translate that into operational organization speak at a kind of a corporate level, because kind of project and program management, yes, that's great, but actually what the organization will look at is their kind of standard metrics and measures in terms of kind of profitability, market share, kind of achievement of those kind of longer term and kind of business stated objectives, not just the time, cost, and quality that we see at project and program. So quite perhaps a kind of a different day to what perhaps some of the PMO managers might be looking at in terms of kind of working with their project and program managers and supporting the delivery of those overall programs. So I just wanted to pull out a few of the particular kind of elements, the kind of the knowledge and the skills and behaviors that would set a PMO director apart from a PMO manager. Now, we're not saying that PMO managers don't have these skills and behaviors, but they certainly need to be more prevalent and are typically the things that are going to be examined and assessed during kind of an interview process or an appointment process in your organization. So I'm just going to do 6. The competency framework details a whole load more, but we've kind of picked out some of the kind of the key ones we believe, and some of the things that'll just kind of reinforce some of the things I've already touched upon. So first one is business acumen. If all you can speak is project and program language, if your focus is purely on are the projects being delivered on time, or the programs being delivered on time, you're missing that whole kind of translation piece in terms of, well, what does it mean to the business? There's very few. We did a report a number of years ago about moving from portfolio reporting to portfolio management. So rather than just kind of doing a report on here's the projects and programs, actually, how do we actively manage the portfolio to drive business value? Not one of the senior managers in those organizations had taken the step, had said, I think we need portfolio management. The kind of things they were saying is, well, how do we get more out of the kind of what we're investing to deliver us against strategy? How can we make better use of the resources? And so we need to be able to understand the organization, understand our industry, but understand the business conversations that take place at that senior level. The second thing we need is very much being able to recognise the various needs across the organisation. And I'd be wrong to say that politics doesn't come into this, certainly kind of not necessarily kind of politics with a capital P down at Parliament and the like, but more of corporate politics. And I did some work a couple of years ago for an organisation, and I was asked to kind of support some of the sponsors of the major programmes. And what was happening is each of those individual program sponsors were fighting for all of the benefits for their part of the organization. And when I talk to kind of PMO directors and I talk to kind of go in and facilitate conversations at a senior level, I often talk about senior managers need to behave like the grown-ups. So we have to recognize that actually it's not a him who shouts loudest gets the work done. And actually, kind of to do the PMO director role well, you need to be able to play within the politics of the organization to make sure that you can kind of call out the types of behaviors that we sometimes see that actually means that we're actually doing the non-optimal collection of projects and programs. And again, if you kind of break the organization down and we have our own individual portfolios, rather than look at kind of that alignment to strategy, it becomes very difficult to do that. So this is quite an interesting one in terms of recognizing the various needs of the organization without kind of annoying everybody, and the PMO being kind of, you just provide the report, thank you very much, and we'll have the conversation without you. So that's a really interesting one in terms of being able to balance those needs. And I think, and again, one of the things I often say when I'm talking to PMO managers and PMO directors, and even with the project managers and sponsors, is we have to kind of recognize and be able to defend that actually taking time to do planning is the right thing to do. Yes, so we're not there to kind of to be the kind of the whipping boy for the kind of senior management by saying, actually, this project where we did the kind of the detailed planning takes 6 months, and the senior management come and say we need it done in 3. Part of the kind of the PMO director's role is to be able to say, we've got a delivery framework. We have to do the planning first. We have to think about the finances. We shouldn't just be diving headlong into delivery without kind of doing an appropriate level of planning and forethought. So quite interesting to kind of balance that need for delivery against the actual kind of the approach to doing it well and effectively, which also leads to this kind of this level of conflict. Now, conflict can be anything from different projects and programs arguing about a particular resource to actually kind of, as we've said, kind of facilitating some of those conversations around which projects and programs are best delivered for the kind of the good of the overall organization, rather than just kind of individuals who kind of sit within kind of functions. And again, I've seen lots of organizations where they've, to avoid an awful lot of conflict, and again, often in public sector, where they've kind of each of the various different elements of the council have got their own portfolio, but then it becomes much more of a challenge, and in a private company where things have come down from head office, how do we balance off are locally required projects and programs to make our division or a department work versus the projects and programs that are coming down from above to say, well, actually, you need to fit them in, and how do we get the overall prioritization of those? So again, kind of managing conflict means we very much need to be good listeners, good communicators, but actually be able to have that kind of credibility to be able to challenge and drive through some kind of proposals for how the kind of the portfolio can be developed going forward. And I think there's a really interesting piece where we've talked about kind of the role of the PMO not being that kind of policeman saying you can't do this or you can't do the other. The danger is as well that we don't fall into the "I told you so" brigade when we've provided some advice and guidance to senior managers around what projects and programs need to be done, and they choose to do something different. So kind of trying to bite our tongue and be able to kind of come back and be able to kind of do that reflections on the decisions that were made in the portfolio level, and what the implications have been, and how we drive improvement in decision making at the senior level rather than just on individual kind of projects and programs, is absolutely key. So those are three. The next three that I just want to pick up on in terms of actually being able to do some of those, that kind of critical analysis. And this is where you absolutely need to understand the interdependencies of the organization, because anybody who agrees to put a new finance system in the first week in March will not be thanked by anybody in the financial function. Yes, understanding that kind of month end, year end typically comes as the 31st of March. That's not the best time to introduce a new finance system. But also in terms of different organizations have different kind of cycles. Having worked for Cadbury's, where we obviously had big timings around Easter and Christmas, working for a stationery organization where there was a huge kind of rise in sales when it came to kind of buying all of the kind of the back to school stationery. You have to understand those business cycles and the kind of interreactions between what's happening on a project and program delivery perspective and what's happening in an operational kind of process. And again, one of the things which I think very few organizations really look at is being able to hold the systems and the process map for the organization, where you can actually say, well, if we look at kind of what projects and programs are going to come live over the next kind of 6 to 12 months, this is a kind of the heat map across the organization of big parts of the organization that are going to be going through change, and therefore actually that will define and feed into where we decide to do projects and programs across the organization. And I think it's something that a lot of organizations are not yet there in terms of being able to do from a capability perspective, or actually kind of recognize that's an important part in the portfolio definition in any kind of structured way. We often kind of talk about kind of the role of innovation, and I think one of the things we look to the kind of from a PMO director's perspective is to create and help the organization create an environment where projects and programs can be delivered effectively. One of the things that we often find is you kind of go to organizations and the project program managers absolutely know what to do. They're kind of some of the holistic processes are not in place in terms of kind of resource management, or the kind of the link with finances, or the link with procurement is often another one, and the huge link with kind of the IT function. Is we need to be able to kind of inspire all of those individuals to kind of see what the bigger picture might be, and then drive a level of collaboration and say, well, actually a lot of the business processes that we see in organizations have been developed to support operational business as usual, and actually it's a second level conversation to actually start looking, well, how do we optimize those processes and procedures so there's no conflict, but support project delivery as well as the operational side. And I think this has become a much more interesting role. Now we're doing much more with that focus has moved to product development in organizations, and we're using kind of development and operational project delivery and operational units doing a mixture of both rather than having them as two separate elements. So we really have to have some of those kind of people skills again matched with the credibility of the PMO director. So in terms of moving into a PMO director role, what we've talked about is really, I've just got kind of a single picture here, is moving on focusing on the individual delivery of kind of projects and programs, to really kind of being able to take a step back and say, well, how does an integrated PMO support the delivery of the projects that also integrates with what business as usual or the operational side of the business are looking at, and how does that drive the strategy of the organization? So very much about kind of taking a business perspective and a business improvement perspective rather than just kind of the individual kind of projects and programs, and living in project and program land in our organization. Really interesting, kind of one of the, I worked with an organization a number of years ago where the PMO director's role, the PMO manager's role then went into the kind of the business improvement director, because it was seen, projects and programs were seen to be such an integral part of improving the overall effectiveness of the organization, that was the job title that they were given. So in if you download the playbook, what we've got is some kind of real kind of practical ways that you can shape your CV. You can look at kind of what experience you need in order to be able to kind of move your kind of PMO manager role and start thinking and start articulating some of that in a PMO director role. And again, I'll come back to that one. One of the things that the House of PMO established a few years ago now was Essentials for a PMO Director. And the Essentials for the PMO Director is a course that's aimed at people who are just moving into that kind of PMO Director role or are aspiring to move into that kind of PMO Director role. And as you'll see, we've got the dates there, and Jen's just put into chat there the link if you're interested in doing that course. So I'm just about run out of time. It's 10 to. Has anybody got any questions that they may want to put in chat? We've all gone all very quiet. And Elmo, can I say, I'm just very pleased that we've actually got somebody with a camera on. That's always nice to see. My advice is always, if you're not going to put your camera on, it's very nice, like Paul and Terry and Haley, that you at least have a photograph against your name so we can actually kind of see. But a moving face is always great. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found that useful. Jen's just put in the chat there, if you've got any other queries, then do get in touch. We're at inquiries@pmolearning.co.uk. Give us a ring. We'd love to chat with you about supporting you with the role or supporting your organisation in establishing the role of PMO Director in your organisation. Hope you have a great afternoon, and for those of you, enjoy your Easter over the weekend and a well-earned break, no doubt. Thank you very much.